that the sun shines down its power to all the world and makes the wind blow strong as it will. So lovely earth can stay lovely still. Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am George Harvey and this is Energy Week, which usually has Tom Fennell, but again he is not here. I hope he's doing well. Every day I get up early and take a look at the news relating to energy and climate change. I look at literally hundreds of items every day and see what I can find that is interesting in the news. I package the news items in synopses that are about 50 or 55 words, give each a link to the original article, put in photographs a lot of times that come from the original articles, and I put up 10 to 15 links every day, and I put together the ones that I think are the best every Wednesday, and on Thursday morning come into the Brattleboro community television, BCTV, and put on this show. So this is what you're seeing, Energy Week. And this week we will start with news items on the 24th of March, which was just 1 week ago today. And let's put this up. The first item is from Renews. Siemens has unveiled a new solution for the protection of offshore wind turbine rotor blades against leading-edge erosion. The protection layer is designed to absorb the impact energy of raindrops and other particles and thereby protect the leading edge from fatigue damage. The picture that's here is of the Hams Rev 2 site, which is a Dong energy site, which is, truthfully, I'm not sure. I think this is off the coast of Denmark. I could be wrong. It is, I believe, in the North Sea, might be in the Baltic. But the issue of leading edge damage is a problem because it means that the blades of the wind turbines have to be replaced. And let's get a picture up there for you so that you can see it. The blades of the wind turbines need to be replaced, but with a way of dealing with that, it is possible to keep the wind turbine blades going longer. The next item, also same day, is from CNews Renewables. U.S. renewables, excluding hydropower plants, now hold a combined share of roughly 9.5% of the nation's total available installed generating capacity, according to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. The country's total wind power capacity equals 74.6 gigawatts, while its operational solar plants are about 15.6 gigawatts. What we are saying here, I think of a gigawatt as being approximately a nuclear plant. So that would kind of indicate nearly 75 gigawatts of nuclear plants worth of wind. Actually, that is not correct, because the capacity factor of a nuclear plant is about 0.9, meaning that it's at the equivalent of full capacity about 90% of the time, perhaps 92% of the time in the United States, less than that in other countries. The capacity factor for wind turbines is very much lower. It's about a third of that, more than a third of that, a little more. If it's offshore, perhaps half as much or a little more, which means that this is the equivalent of perhaps 30 nuclear plants that have been put up worth of wind. 15 gigawatts of solar is the equivalent of about 3 nuclear plants, maybe 4. And of course, we are talking about capacity which is not there all the time. And but this is something to note. This is something I say fairly frequently when we're talking about wind and solar. Wind doesn't blow all the time. The solar the sun doesn't shine all the time. It is intuitively obvious that if you're going to go into your kitchen at 2 o'clock in the morning and throw a switch, you need to know that a power plant is going. and that wind and solar are not sufficient to light your kitchen. That is intuitively obvious. It was intuitively obvious to Isabella that the world was flat. And so the same is more or less true about wind and solar. The fact is that if you think about one wind farm, yeah, it's not going to be producing a lot of power all the time. But if you think about wind farms spread over distances that are reasonable for transmission of electric power, the wind is always blowing. It's always blowing somewhere, always blowing somewhere. And when the sun comes out, it's happening at the peak demand times. And for this reason, in Germany, the build out of renewable power has taken the German power grid, which was the most reliable in Europe, which had customers experiencing an average of 15 minutes or so of outage every year. And when they multiplied the amount of non-hydro renewable power they were getting by about 8, the result was that that most reliable grid became considerably more reliable with outages of about 10 minutes a year. And this has to do with a very complicated set of facts that are simple to execute because it has distributed power being distributed geographically and across a large number of technologies. So don't figure that intuitively obvious is particularly useful. Anyway, going on, our next item is from Financial Times, and that says Scotland's huge Longannet power station is to produce its last electricity on March 24th, the date of this report, which was a week ago today being March 31st, ending coal-fired generation north of the border. Scottish Power said the 2,400 megawatt power station on the banks of the Firth in Fife, the Firth of Forth in Fife, I should say, would burn through its remaining coal stocks about 3 o'clock p.m. And what this means is that there is no electricity being generated in Scotland from coal. And my understanding is that there are 6 remaining coal-burning plants in the UK, which has decided that it's going to get off coal at some time in the very near future. I think it's about 5 years from now that they're going to close their last coal-burning plants. The picture that we have here is of a man in that station, the Longannet coal-burning station, and he is pointing to, perhaps he's pointing to the future, I don't know. But that was from the Financial Times, and we are up to Friday, March 25th. And this is an interesting item. We should bear in mind that about a week ago, 2 weeks ago, the Chinese government reported that it was going to close down 1,000 coal-burning plants this year. Well, here is a little bit more from EchoWatch. Chinese media reported that the country's National Energy Administration has ordered 13 provincial governments to suspend approvals of new coal-fired power plants until the end of 2017. And of course, there is no guarantee that they are going to continue after that date. Another group of 15 provinces was ordered to delay new construction of projects already approved. So the Chinese are not just shutting down the coal plants they've got, they are not replacing them with new plants that are coal burning. What they are replacing them with in huge numbers is wind turbines and solar farms. They're putting those up in wind turbines in particular. They're putting up in China about as fast as the rest of the world combined, if I recall, but certainly a lot faster than the United States. It's a little worrisome, actually, because it means that the Chinese are going to have far less expensive power than the United States for operating its heavy industries, and it also means that they will be more secure in terms of their fuel than the United States, with the result that the Chinese will be able to outcompete the United States both in terms of military and in terms of economic activity. And I personally find that kind of worrisome, but of course there are people who claim to be patriotic Americans who are acting in ways that are really supporting the American fossil fuel industry, probably because of the fact that they are very heavily invested in them. And I'm speaking, of course, of some very wealthy people who are trying to move American politics in the direction that they want to go. This is, in my opinion, not a patriotic thing. The Chinese are moving away from coal because of pollution. That makes it easy for them to do it. But it's a very forward-looking action when you consider the fact that in the future they will not be dependent on coal. They will not be dependent on oil because they're replacing that too. They will be dependent on their own energy, which is produced internally in the country. And now I've got a problem with the computer here, but I can take care of that in just a moment. There we go. Anyway, there we go. Our next item, also on the 25th of March, is from the Globe and Mail. A colorful goop developed in the University of Toronto could be a real-life blockbuster. When spread on a strip of metal and subjected to an electric current, it can break apart molecules of water at about 3 times the rate and far more cheaply than any other substance currently available. And here you see a picture, let me get the picture, of a researcher in Toronto working on this particular project. This is an interesting development, particularly interesting because it makes it very cheap to make hydrogen. And hydrogen can be used for a couple of different purposes, one of which is to provide electric power or other power. It can be used as a fuel. It can be used as a fuel for driving cars. We talked a couple of weeks ago about a car that was being developed in Wales that would drive a couple of 100 miles on a kilogram, 1.5 kilograms of hydrogen, which by the way is a lot because hydrogen is extremely light. And so you need a lot of storage space to hold 1.5 kilograms. But it can be used for powering stoves, powering furnaces. You can mix it into natural gas in the natural gas pipelines, and it is it's a very ecologically sound substitute for natural gas in that kind of way. But it can also be used for manufacturing fuels of various kinds, and that includes being used in conjunction with carbon dioxide that you can get from the atmosphere to make drop-in replacements for things like oil and gasoline, which, by the way, I think is not the best way to do things, but it is certainly better than pumping oil out of the ground and turning it into gasoline, polluting the atmosphere in the process. Our next item is from GRIST. A report from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, which is also called NREL, is the deepest dive on solar's potential since 2008. It examines the country's potential for rooftop solar power. According to the report, we could get about 39% of the country's electricity consumption at current levels. This is from GRIST, and this is an interesting report because it raises the amount of solar amount of electricity we could get from rooftop solar by about double. It just about doubles the amount that we could get. I will point out that 39% is not even half, so we've got to get electric power from other sources. But 39% is very appreciable. It's about double what we currently get from nuclear power. The other thing is, and this is not capacity, this is the actual amount of electricity that's being generated. But another thing that we should bear in mind too is that ultimately I don't think it's going to be anywhere close to 39%, which takes a view of a complete build out of all rooftop solar capacity that's available. In addition to that, we are going to be, I believe, putting more and more reliance on electric vehicles, and they have to be powered with electricity, which will increase our consumption, and we will have more and more dependence on electric heat in our homes. In both cases, the electric vehicle and electric heat, they are cheaper than other sources. The cost of running an electric vehicle is very low, and when we get batteries that will, like the Tesla batteries, drive a car for hundreds of miles, I think that we will be at a point where we will be at a tipping point. We're almost there now. The Tesla actually, I think, is there. A friend of mine drove to Florida in a Tesla from Vermont, went the whole way down with no delays, stopped in places where he could get fueled while he was having lunch or dinner, and didn't pay for any fuel at all because Tesla was providing it. The heat part of this, anybody who really pays a lot of attention to the heating market will realize that we've got air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, and these things are far more efficient than any other way that we can deal with heating a house. And in fact, the air source heat pump, which is less efficient than a ground source heat pump, is sufficiently efficient that if you've got a well-sealed, well-insulated house, that heat pump will probably keep you going 99% of the time if you're powering it with your own solar panels on your roof. And that makes it very inexpensive to heat a house. That article, by the way, was from Grist. We're up to Saturday, March 26th. And what we have on that date is an item from Echo Watch. The United States Department of Energy will participate in the Clean Line Transmission Project to bring 4,000 megawatts of low-cost electricity from farms in Oklahoma and Texas Panhandle to the southeast. The project will bring enough affordable wind power for more than 1.5 million homes. This is from Echo Watch. And there you see a wind farm in, I believe this one is in Oklahoma, I'm not sure. But what this is saying is that they're moving that electricity over a distance of perhaps 1,000 miles, providing wind power to Florida, Georgia, places like that where there is not a lot of wind power because there's not a lot of wind. From Oklahoma and Texas, where there is a lot of wind power because there is a lot of wind. And we could actually get power like this from Oklahoma in Vermont in terms of what's available in a cost-effective manner, because the transmission lines that we have today are so much more cost-effective than they were in the past. This is one of the reasons why I say that the business of intuitively obvious doesn't work anymore. In 1986, the transmission lines that we had lost about a little bit less than 10% of their power per 1,000 miles. And by 1996, that was cut down to about 6%. Today, it is down to less than 3%. And the amount of the distance that you can travel with these transmission lines cost effectively is so great that we could get power, I believe, from Tierra del Fuego if we just had the power lines built there in between. And that being the case, we could pick up our power from Oklahoma, and if it turns out that Oklahoma doesn't have wind that day, we could get it from Wyoming, or we could get it from Michigan, or we could get it from the Aleutian Islands. It doesn't make any difference, because as we build out these wind power plants, some one of them is always going to be available, because the wind is always blowing somewhere. Our next item, I should continue a couple of things about that item. Because this is the US DOE, it is not something that can be blocked by the states. And this makes it very hard to prevent this from happening. There are reasons built into the law why this cannot just happen everywhere. It will only be possible to do this in places where the demand for electricity is actually increasing, as it is in southeast, to which they're building this line. But in general, in the United States, the demand for electricity is decreasing, which means that in most markets, they can't just come in as the federal government and say, we're going to build these transmission lines. That is not the case, for example, in New England. The efficiency and other factors are coming in to reduce our power consumption. It makes it difficult for utilities to make money, but it also makes it difficult to build these power lines. Okay, the next item is from Live Mint. If Tom were here, he would tell you that's the Indian equivalent of the Wall Street Journal. And the article says the Indian government has a new goal. Come 2030, and every car user in India could have an electric vehicle. Under the plan, the vehicles will be given without an upfront payment and will be paid for by users over a period of time from the savings made on fuel, according to the energy minister. This is an interesting idea because the cost of running an electric vehicle is so low compared to the cost of running a conventional gas-powered vehicle that the savings that you have in the difference is sufficient to pay for the vehicle. That's something to consider. Our next item comes from Biomass Magazine. And it is, at the end of 2015, Europe had 17,240 biogas plants. That is 17,240 biogas plants in Europe. About a year and a half ago, I read that we had a little bit fewer than 300 in the United States. The total installed capacity of those plants is 8,293 megawatts, which is, in this case, the capacity factor is so high that we could actually compare that to about 8 nuclear power plants. The electricity they produced stood at 63.3 terawatt hours, enough for 14.6 million European households. The numbers are growing fast in such places as the UK, where they doubled in just 1 year. This was in Biomass Magazine. And you know, it reminds me a little bit of a conference that I went to. And I went to a seminar on biomass, and the person who was moderating the seminar stood up and said, "What is biomass? Biomass is forest products. And it's terrible because it pollutes the countryside." She didn't say it quite that way, but that was the implication. Biogas is a product that comes from biomass, which is mostly made up of straw and fertilizer. It has nothing, manure. It has nothing to do with forest biomass. It has nothing to do with wood necessarily. It could include a small amount of wood. But this is a picture of a biomass plant. And the dome structure there is a structure for holding the gas under pressure so it can be delivered to a generating unit. There are biodigesters there. They're basically like fancy septic tanks, and sewage can go into them, and it can be used to manufacture both electricity ultimately and fertilizer. One of the things that I've talked about on a number of occasions on this show is a biomass plant that my son, Jeffrey, worked on putting the centrifuges in. And that particular plant is the first plant in the United States to have what is called a Pondus reactor, which has been used in a number of places in Europe. And what that reactor does is it breaks down the sludge that comes out of the first biodigester by using heat and acid. And then that means that in another biodigester, it can be redigested, producing an increase of 30% in the amount of methane generated. The methane is used for heating in the plant. It's also used to generate electricity, and the result of that is that the plant, which is in Kenosha, Wisconsin, is operating on sewage treatment for 100,000 people in a municipal situation, and basically It is putting out water that is considered pure enough to discharge directly into Lake Michigan next to a public beach. It is, has a small amount of gas coming out, which is can't be smelled, and it is almost all made up of water and carbon dioxide. There should be no methane in it at all. And another thing that it's generating is little brick-like things that are sewage that have been treated to the point where they are classified as a Class A fertilizer by the EPA, and you could, according to the EPA, grow carrots in them, although my landlady says she doesn't want to have carrots grown in such things because she doesn't trust the plant not to have toxins in, you know, mercury or something like that, pesticides in those things that are not dealt with by the plant. But hopefully that's not a problem, and if it isn't, then it should be okay to do. The EPA says it is. Anyway, these biomass plants, there are thousands of them. In Europe, there's 17,000. The U.S. Department of Agriculture said that we could have as many as 12,000, 11 or 12,000 of them on farms in the United States, just processing straw and manure. But of course, we've got the ability to use these things for processing municipal waste. We can use them for other purposes, and that includes, for example, processing food waste coming from restaurants, coming from supermarkets and so forth. We have an enormous resource here that is being ignored very largely in the United States. And by the way, I will put in a plug here for Vermont, because it had 16 of them in operation before California had its first one. That having been said, we will go on to our next item. I've read that. The investment in renewable energy hit a record $286 billion in 2015, according to the United Nations, which issued a report on the subject. For the first time, over half came from developing countries. More than half of the investment in renewable energy came from developing countries. New investment in cleaner energy exceeded $2.3 trillion since 2004, when investments totaled less than $50 billion. This is from the Daily Sabah. One of the things that was interesting about this report is that it pointed out that the amount of money that went into, the capacity that was installed, renewable capacity that was installed, was approximately double the capacity that was installed for natural gas and coal burning plants and oil combined, fossil fuel plants. And a lot of that capacity was of such things as these biomass plants, biogas plants, solar power that was operating in some cases 24/7 because they're using solar thermal to heat salt to be molten, and then using that molten salt over a 24-hour time frame to generate power by using it to drive steam turbines. There is a huge change underway in the world of renewable energy, and it's going on. Our next item was from Sunday, March 27th, and this is from Daily News and Analysis. In India, Tata Power's Mulshi solar plant shows how energy needs do not have to be met at the cost of the environment. Suitable plants will be grown immediately below the solar panels so that all available land can be used to its fullest with fertility maintained. In this particular case, a friend of mine sent me an email when I sent out my email saying this, and he said, "What in the world is growing under those solar panels?" Well, this is the site of the new plant, but it is not the new plant. It's not necessarily the new plant fully fleshed out. The thing that is being grown under these panels is in fact grass. And the grass is being used for sheep to graze on in some places. This is very commonly done in the UK. The solar panels are elevated high enough off the ground that the sheep won't get into collisions with them. You can't put goats under them because the goats will try to jump up on them. Cattle are not such a big useful thing, but sheep work pretty well under these things. And they like the solar panels. They can get out of the sun if they want to by going under them. And the grass grows under there pretty well. I don't know what other agricultural products could be grown under them. I imagine there are a few. I'm just not entirely sure what they are. But certainly this particular site is being developed so that grass grows under the solar panels. And that does keep the soil fertility going, because it means that the life of the soil can be maintained. Worms will keep going in the soil. Insects will keep going in the soil. The mycology still functioning, funguses in the soil. Funguses, by the way, are very important. They are kind of a co-occupier of the land. And with the plants that we're usually interested in growing and harvesting, and even if we don't eat the fungus has a profound influence on the soil fertility. These are all important issues. Our next item is from Morningstar.com. The number of energy loans in default is in danger of default is on course to extend above 50% this year at several major banks, including Wells Fargo, Comerica, according to bankers and others in the industry. Oil prices remain at about $40 a barrel, which is very bad news for these banks. And what they're talking about in terms of the energy loans, of course, is not loans for solar or wind. This is loans for oil, heaven forbid for coal. And at $40 a barrel, the oil companies, almost none of the oil companies can make a profit. And in fact, most of them are losing money like mad. We have mentioned this in the past. Anybody who really wants to check this out can look at the charts that are available online that show the changes over time of the Dow Jones Coal Index. A lot of people don't realize that there is such a thing as a Dow Jones Coal Index. People are familiar with the Dow Jones Industrial Index, which is talked about in the news a lot. But the coal index has dropped from about 725, give or take, in 2008 until recently it has been in the neighborhood of 20 to 28, something like that. It's lost 97%, 96, 97, sometimes upwards of 97% of its value over a period of 8 years because of the decline of the coal industry, which is not the result of the federal government entirely, although this is something that is also kind of a bone of contention of mine. The coal industry has been burning coal for 100 years now, generating electricity, and that the fumes from that coal, particularly as the stacks got taller, the fumes get carried for miles and miles and miles and miles and miles, so that coal burning power plants in Iowa will produce fallout that comes down in Vermont. And if you go to the Vermont Fish and Game website and look for information on mercury and other pollutants in fish and how many fish you can take, you'll find that there are charts there that show how many fish a person can eat safely out of waterways in Vermont. And in some cases, for example, the charts are divided so that they treat children and pregnant women separately from everyone else, and the charts are divided by location and species of fish. And what they say, for example, is that if you catch a really big trout in Lake Champlain, don't eat it. It's almost certainly polluted, because it is at the top of a food chain and it is not capable of getting rid of that mercury that has got into it. And so it has it has a problem. Well, the U.S. EPA did not really want to get involved in the business of regulating coal plants, but the Supreme Court told them that they had to a number of years ago. They had to do something about this, and so they did. And now what's happened is that completely independently of who was in the White House or who was in the Congress at the time, the United States is regulating the emissions of coal-burning plants. And when you have the emissions regulated, it becomes very much less economical to run those plants. And it's at a point now where the most expensive sources of electricity we've got are coal and nuclear. This according to Lazard Associates projections of the levelized cost of electricity, also from other places. But the cheapest sources we've got for electricity today are wind and solar. And solar is kind of passing natural gas. It was tied more or less with natural gas. By the end of this year, it will be pretty much past natural gas in terms of a utility scale source. For people who put solar on their roof, they're providing for solar power that is not competing with wholesale prices. It's competing with retail prices, and so the solar power achieved grid parity in that circumstance years ago in Vermont. But in much of the country now, it is becoming cheaper to get power from solar than it is to get it from natural gas. And in fact, we're seeing power purchase agreements, PPAs they're called, where a company will have a certain amount of power available that it is going to produce over a period of 15 years or 20 years or something like that. And an organization like the municipality of Dallas, Texas is looking for purchasing power, and they will set into an agreement that is a long-term power purchase plan, and the prices at which power is transacted in those agreements in some parts of the world have gone less than 5 cents per kilowatt hour for solar power that is not subsidized, which means that subsidized power in the United States, we should be seeing it coming down to about 4 cents per kilowatt hour. It's very, very difficult for nuclear and coal to compete with that because their levelized costs are typically upwards of 10 cents per kilowatt hour. And when you're talking about thousands of kilowatt hours, millions of kilowatt hours over per year over a period of 20 years, that can come to a lot of money. And so solar is getting to the point, and wind is getting to the point where they are able to compete. Now, the oil companies are having to compete at a cost that is extremely low. The reason why the oil companies are involved is not because oil is used for production of electricity, but because natural gas is used, and the oil companies all have natural gas for sale as well. And so the price of natural gas is extremely low. It is attractive right now to build natural gas plants, but in the first 2 months of 2016, over 90% of the infrastructure that was put in the United States, according to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, was from wind and solar, not from natural gas. So the oil companies are in deep trouble. It looks to me like it's just, in the short term, in a few months, it may recover a little bit, but in the long term, over the period of a year, 2, 3, 5 years, I think it's only going to get worse for the oil industry. Now, we are up to March 28th, Monday, and we have an item that came from the BBC. And let me get myself back in action here. Goodness, what has happened to my mouse? Ah, there we go. Let's not use the mouse. Let's use the cursor. No, it won't work. Sorry about that. Authorities in India, this is from BBC, authorities in the Indian state of West Bengal were forced to suspend generation at the 2,300 megawatt, at a 2,300 megawatt coal burning plant because the canal carrying cooling water to it went dry. The township it was in lost water. Residents had to be given bottled water to drink, and the whole area had electricity shortages. And here we have a picture. Let me put it up so that you can all see it. Here we have a picture of that dry canal. You can see how big the canal is because there's, in the foreground of this, slightly to the left of center, there's a picture of somebody walking with a load of some kind balanced on his head. And that canal was deeper than he was tall, but it was carrying water to the plant for cooling. One thing that a lot of people don't realize about electric power plants is that they have to be cooled. This is not just nuclear plants that have those big, very fat cooling towers. This is all kinds of what they call thermal plants, where heat is used to produce power. You have to get rid of the excess heat. And in fact, the Vermont Yankee plant, I talked to an engineer at the Vermont Yankee plant when it was operating, and we were talking about the prospect of its closing down. And he told me if people would just allow the water from the plant to be pumped to other parts of the area and used, and this water, honestly, it's not radioactive. But if it were moved around, it would provide enough heating to heat every house in the state of Vermont, or the equivalent. It would probably, most of it, go to Massachusetts. But I think you kind of get an idea of how much heat is involved in these when you realize that heat has to be taken off and put into the environment somehow. It at Vermont Yankee went into the river, it went into the air. And this is a serious problem because it means all of these plants, and of course this is not true of most solar plants, it is not true of wind-powered plants, it is not true of hydropower, it is not true, it really is not true of biogas. It is true of biomass that's being burned to heat a boiler, but for most of those renewable energy plants, it's not a problem. It is a problem if you're talking about nuclear or fossil fuels to deal with the excess heat and get it off. And that's one of the reasons why, as we move into climate change affecting the environment and the availability of fresh water, these fossil fuel plants have got just one more strike against them. The next item we've got is from Clean Technica. China is aiming to triple its solar PV generation capacity by 2020, bringing it up to 143 gigawatts. And I'm going to tell you that that's the equivalent of perhaps 20, it depends upon how it's done, but perhaps 20, 25 nuclear power plants. The National Energy Administration says the plan is to add between 15 gigawatts and 20 gigawatts of photovoltaic capacity every year, investing about $368 billion in types of grid infrastructure at the same time. They need that infrastructure in order to move that electricity around. Once they've got it, they've got electricity sources that basically don't require any fuel going into the future. So that is something that they can rely on. It is secure power for them. That was from Clean Technica. Gloucester Daily Times said power generators are resisting Massachusetts Governor Charlie Baker's plan to tap Canadian hydropower to meet the state's energy needs. His plan, which hinges on lawmakers' approval, calls on the utilities to import 1,200 megawatts to 2,400 megawatts of hydroelectricity. And yes, they are resisting that. And honestly, I think it's better to use hydro from Quebec than it is to use fossil fuels, where the fuel is just coming in from some other part of the world as well. But there is no need to import any of this electricity because Massachusetts has got plenty of ability to generate its own. It's a question of availability and cost. It'll cost a lot of money to build the transmitting facilities to get that power to Massachusetts. It's not just something that happens automatically. We are up to Tuesday, and this is an interesting one. I'm sorry Tom wasn't here. This comes from Alt Energy Mag. Advanced Rail Energy Storage said its proposal, this is a company, said its proposed commercial scale gravity-based rail energy storage project has been granted a right-of-way lease on a Bureau of Land Management, by the Bureau of Land Management. The 50 megawatt project is on 106 acres of public land in Nevada, and it will help stabilize the grid. And if you look at this picture, let me get it up on the screen so you can all see it. There is an archaic wind farm in the background that has latticework masts and small wind turbines. These are not very bird friendly, but they don't build them like that much anymore. That thing that you see there is a rail car, which it looks to me like it's absolutely fully automated. When there's too much electricity available, they drive these cars up the hill, consuming electricity in the process. When they need the power, they drive them down the hill where they generate power. And this thing is a 50 megawatt plant, so it has a fair amount of storage capacity, and they say that it's a good deal cheaper than storage in a pumped storage facility. We have a pumped storage facility that's 1,080 megawatts down on the line between Irving and Northfield, Massachusetts. And I would suggest to anybody who wants to see how that works, go down there. They have a beautiful place. It's kind of like a park, and you can go down, take a look at their museum, see, and they will tell you how it works. VTdigger.org says the Vermont State Senate is due to consider legislation this week that proponents say will give municipalities a say over where renewable energy projects will get built. To have that say, states and regions would have to write energy development provisions into their regional and town plans. This is something which is a pretty divisive issue for a bunch of reasons. There are organizations behind this that want to basically stop the development of renewable power in Vermont, and they have, in many cases, they are connected with national organizations that want to do that. But there are people who have a legitimate interest in trying to make sure that their homes, their municipalities that they live in, have got some say in where things are sited. This bill, which is Vermont Senate Bill 230, as I recall, has not yet been passed, but it has been sent to the Senate to vote on, I believe. I think that happened yesterday, today being the 31st of March. Okay, the Desert Sun tells us rooftop solar panels could meet 74% of California's electricity needs, and the country could get about 39% of it. According to the study from NREL, which we mentioned earlier, in 2008, NREL estimated that the nation could get 21% of its power from solar. The reason I included this in the list of articles, having already mentioned it, is that 74% of California's electricity needs is a huge amount of power. And I think it's pretty impressive that you could get that much power potentially in a state. However, there's one thing to bear in mind, and that is this assumes a complete build-out of all available rooftops. And of course, that isn't going to happen, because complete 100%, it just never happens. I think you could try to get there, but we'll see. Okay, we're up to Wednesday, March 30th, which is yesterday. Wind energy reduces a variety of health-harming air pollutants, including smog-causing oxides of sulfur and nitrogen. This helps reduce rates of respiratory diseases such as asthma. Electricity generated by wind in 2015 represented $7.3 billion in avoided health costs last year alone. And this was in Green Energy Times, which I know because I put it up there myself. It was not my article. It was an article that was a news release. And that is, of course, a picture of what is called a nodding donkey, which is and this particular one is broken down. If you know anything about nodding donkeys, you know that that big thing that looks kind of like the donkey's head should have steel cables coming down from it, going down into the well to operate the pump. Oh, I'm sorry, they are there. I am sorry. Okay, that's a nodding donkey. The steel cables do come down, and they they operate the pump as this thing goes up and down. This is technology that goes back to 80, 90 years ago, and has more, and has been around for a long time, and it's a rusty technology. By golly, it sure is. Behind it, wind turbines. The World Health Organization says that the cost of health problems in the United States as a result of pollution is about $250 billion a year. So it's very easy to believe that the American Wind Energy Association, which produced this number of $7.3 billion, is probably right on target. I always wonder, you know, whenever I come across these things, where did the information come from? Who does it benefit? In this case, it benefits the wind industry, the American Wind Energy Association in particular, but that doesn't mean that it's wrong. And $250 billion a year in toxins, most of which come in one way or another from the fossil fuels industry, is a huge amount of money. And if you find, as they had, that 6% of the electricity is being produced by wind power, that means that the toxins that are being released in connection with 66% of our electrical power have been replaced. Now, wind power has put pressure on nuclear, but it has not reduced the amount of power that has come from nuclear, at least not much. The big thing that has been reduced by wind power is coal, and natural gas has increased, but there was practically no coal power brought online last year in the United States, 3 megawatts as I recall, and that is any coal plants that were closed, and there were a lot of them. Every one of them meant that there was few particulates, fewer mercury, smaller amount of sulfuric acid, nitric acid, things of that nature getting into the atmosphere. And that makes a huge difference, both in terms of the amount of money that is involved in healthcare. Asthma, we're talking about 10 million hospital visits. And if you can cut out 6% of that, you've done a good day's work. The next item, and this is the last item, comes from CNN. About 7.9 million people are now at risk from earthquakes, scientists believe, and those earthquakes caused by fracking, including certain regions of Oklahoma, Kansas, Colorado, New Mexico, Texas, and Arkansas. The U.S. Geological Survey said these earthquakes don't factor in building codes, but do create hazards. And this is an important issue because the earthquakes are happening in places where earthquakes are not anticipated. So the building codes in Oklahoma, for example, assume that you're going to get one earthquake with a magnitude upwards of 3 every 10 months, perhaps, in the state. And most people would not even feel that in the state. But now they've got more earthquakes happening in Oklahoma above a magnitude of 3 than happen in California. And that means that their infrastructure, houses, buildings of other kinds, roads, dams, all of that infrastructure is at risk from earthquakes that they never expected could happen, because historically they didn't happen. And now all of a sudden, they've got so many happening, and it's not just Oklahoma, it's Kansas, Colorado, New Mexico, Texas, Arkansas. I don't know. I would imagine probably other places as well. These earthquakes are causing trouble. And I will tell you, I am quite worried about fracking, and I'm quite worried about the natural gas leaks, the methane leaks that come into the environment. We have seen estimates of almost 6% of the gas that is brought out of those wells being lost. Some of it, what came up to the surface, not through the pipes to the wells, but through the ground. And in some cases, there's a lot of this stuff. But if 6% of the gas is being lost as methane, that means that the environmental damage in terms of climate change that is happening as a result of fracking is probably worse from methane than it was from coal, because methane is far worse as a climate change causing gas, as a warming gas, greenhouse gas, than carbon dioxide, which is what the coal burns into. And this is why, and it's been going on for a couple of years, there have been scientists who have been saying natural gas is worse than coal. We've got to get rid of both. We've got to stop burning fossil fuels altogether as soon as we can. We can do this. We have the technology. It is available. We do not have to develop new technology. New technology is being developed, but it is not needed to do the job. And so we have a road laid out in front of us. But we have to stop the fracking, and that we don't need to do it because we don't need natural gas. We don't need coal to move into the future. And truthfully, we need very little or nothing in the way of baseload power because of the things that I had told you earlier. We can do it using renewables and the new technology. The technology that we're dependent on when we're dependent on baseload power is 80 or 90 years old and an extremely bad match for grid demand. And so there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, the Energy Week show, and I hope that you will have a wonderful week and come back next time.
I would hope gentle rains can